Hello, welcome to the webinar, The Haitian Challenge, How Could Mexico Contribute to Manage the Haitian Migration? A conversation with Giovanni Lepri, UN Refugee Agency representative in Mexico. Thank you to all the attendees for being here today. And the conversation will be moderated by my colleague, Piotr Plewa, here at Duke University. So thank you, Dr. Plewa, for being with us and taking the time and sharing with us your experience and about this very relevant topic about migration in Latin America and Central America. And I'm sure that if there are going to be a lot of questions and comments, and I would ask the attendees to submit all questions and comments throughout the presentation and during the Q&A time through the Q&A function. Thank you again, and Piotr, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It is my pleasure to welcome here Mr. Giovanni Lepri, the UN Refugee Agency representative in Mexico. Mr. Lepri brings a wealth of experience in the subject matter. He acquired this experience theoretically studying forced migration at Oxford recently, and more importantly, working with the refugees in Europe, in Africa, as well as in Latin America. So we have an expert on the topic here, and this is something that I hope we can use as an opportunity to untangle this very complex new migration, thanks to Giovanni. He has been with the UNHCR for the past 22 years, serving in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Chad, Sudan, Mozambique, Greece, Colombia, and currently Mexico. I propose that we take another 30 minutes or so to unpack some of the basic issues when it comes to Haitians in Mexico, and then we'll proceed to the questions and answer. Please submit them using the chat form at any time during our presentation, and after around 30 minutes, I'll take the questions and we'll discuss them. I am not going to steal the show from our star, but just maybe 3 facts to get us started, or 3 observations. Haitian migration to Mexico is very interesting because it has grown in an unexpected way over the past year. When Haitians started coming to Mexico around 2013, there were 14 of them applying for asylum in Mexico. This past year, there were 51,827. So we saw a large increase of Haitian migration to Mexico, from less than 1% of all asylum seekers applying in Mexico to 39%. And 39% is quite a big chunk. We saw Hondurans reaching around 40% recently, but Hondurans took a couple years to reach this proportion, whereas Haitians reached a year. This is very important for Mexico logistically, because out of a sudden Mexico had to deal with an unexpected flow of Haitians, migrants, and refugees, a mixed flow of migrants. The second point I just would like to make is that it's a very complex migration and complex trajectories. So from the perspective of someone who manages a migration, who needs to decide whether applicants meet the criteria or not, for sure it requires experience, it requires training, it requires resources, and it requires a collaboration with a number of migration stakeholders in Mexico and internationally. And the third last point is, this is a very interesting flow, because Haitians who are coming to Mexico, the vast majority of them pass through most of South American countries and through Central America, which means that Mexico is not the only country that can contribute to better management of Haitian migration. So let's start now unpacking the issues a little bit more. Giovanni, thank you so much for being with us. I pass the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Piotr. Thank you very much for the invitation. And I really hope that in this exchange we have, this 45, 50 minutes we have together, that I can contribute to untangle the complex. And as you mentioned it already, I mean, I think in your brief introduction, you used the word complex at least 3-4 times, and I think it's extremely appropriate. It is a movement, which we call it in our more or less technical jargon, we call it about a population, a mixed movement, mixed because the causes that are prompting this movement of population are very different, but also the situation in which each one of those persons, and now we focus on Haitians, but we could also look at other movement of population that are actually increasingly arriving at the southern border of Mexico, and there it's the part that is interesting, and as I think is the title also this encounter is how Mexico can contribute for a better management of the situation, or contribute in terms of stabilizing the population. So in this case, as I said, we focus on Haitians, and mostly because of what you mentioned before, the number had gone up very sharply in a short period of time, and it was relatively unexpected. So we will see that we can try, or I can try to give an idea of what are the variables that we think that prompted this movement towards the last part of 2021. But maybe just to give some elements for the discussions, more than what I can, then we can exchange more in a question and answer part. I have prepared just a very brief presentation just to fix few of the elements of the discussion. So we can just go through the first slide. Yeah, this slide I think gives quite a clear image on how the situation in terms of asylum application in Mexico has changed during the last few years. If you look only a few years back, we talk about 2014, 15, and 16, the number of persons arriving in Mexico and applying to be recognized as refugees were only 2,000 in 2014, then 3,000, 8,000, and then it started really as of 2018, the number started changing. And I go straight to 2021 because last year, the Commission for Refugees, which is the entity in Mexico responsible to receive, analyze, and adjudicate the asylum claims, recorded 131,414 asylum claims, which, and I think, Piotr, this is important to mention, in which position Mexico among the 3 countries worldwide that have received more asylum claims in one single year. So it's not something that maybe it comes automatically into mind when we think about Mexico. Generally, we think about other countries, but Mexico became one of the 3 top countries in terms of new asylum claims. And although we will see December and January the numbers started to decrease, but it's very early to say how it will be 2022. First of all, there is a seasonal issue. Generally, December, January are low as compared to other months, and there are a number of other variables that we're gonna see. But this, I think, it's important just to put it in the context. But the next slide, which is more related to the topic we are discussing now, is that when we look at 2021, close to 52,000, and you mentioned it already, of the asylum claims that Mexico received were from Haitian nationals. So the majority, so the first nationality in Mexico for 2021 in terms of claim was Haiti, which was completely unprecedented. This was totally new. Now, if we add to these 52,000, we add the persons that have registered their claims as Chilean or Brazilian nationals, but in reality, those are dependents, are basically children of Haitian nationals which were born in Brazil and in Chile mostly, also in other countries, but the vast majority were in those two countries, and which, due to the fact that those are countries that apply the jus soli, they receive at birth the nationality of those countries. So if we add up this number, we even go higher, and we go close to 62,000 applicants from Haiti. So as you see, as compared to 131,000, so it's more than it's really close to half of all the claims were from either Haitian nationals or dependents, and surpassing, as you mentioned it already, by surpassing, for example, Honduras, which historically has been the main nationality of asylum seekers in Mexico. So we can pass to the next one. This is basically the same, similar to the previous one, but it's just to compare with other nationalities. If you look, what happened last year is really quite amazing. The first columns, very colorful columns, are for Haitian nationals, and you see, for example, the month of October, in which the number were around 12,000 in a single month. Just going back to no, we don't have to go back to the slide, but when I was presenting the first slide, saying that in 2014, 15, and 16, the number for a year of asylum seekers in Mexico did not surpass the 8,000. We can see that in a single month of October 2021, the number of Haitian nationals which applied in Mexico were basically more than the sum of several years, just a few years back. So just to give an idea on what we are talking about in terms of the numbers. So we can pass to the next one. Now, this is, of course, this is important to mention it because it gives you an idea also on the pressure in terms of asylum application in Mexico. This, of course, is not only for Asian, but this specific slide, I have extracted the Haitian application. So 82%, close to 83% of all the claims were lodged in the south. So we're lodged in between Chiapas, mostly in Chiapas, and mostly in Tapachula, which is somebody called Tapachula Tapayork, saying that is such a diversity of nationalities recently that it looks like a New York demographics. I mean, it's maybe it's a bit extreme, but it's true that as a relatively small city in the southern Mexico, the border of Guatemala, became one of the, we call it, using a bit of a word borrowed from Europe, but the hotspot of arrival, transit, asylum claims. And then maybe I already go to what I want to mention later is the need to look for different solutions for different needs. Not everybody is a refugee. Not everybody is a pure migrant. You have people that cannot, and for the Haitian is particularly significant, that cannot return to their country of origin. At the same time, in many cases, they cannot or they don't will to go back to countries where they transited from, and they might have an option. And that's why I think that Mexico can play an important role, might have an option in Mexico, but not necessarily going through the whole process of being recognized as refugee. But I don't want to preempt some of the question or the discussion we will have later. Just to, yes, I want to mention that the fact that 82%, close to 83% of the claims were lodged in Tapachula put an enormous pressure on Tapachula as such, as a city, but mostly on the asylum office, on the commission, the Comar, and the fact that the law in Mexico foresees that if you lodge your claim in one state of the federal state, one of the 32 federal entities, you have to stay in the same state where you lodge your claim for all the period of the adjudication of your claim, which means in several cases having to wait for months in the same state. And those are not the state most developed in Mexico. Actually, are the ones that, by all indicators, they have already several complexities. Now we go quickly. Not many more slides I have, but the demographics, this I think is interesting, particularly the fact that 82% of the Asian nationals that arrived in Mexico last year are in a productive, we call it a productive working age, the average, of course, productive working age. And then we can see also the distribution between male and female is more or less the same, close to 90% adults and 10% children. We can pass to the next. So, I mean, this is only to give you some elements, and I will not enter into detail of this slide, otherwise it will take a long time. But just to give an idea, 100% of the persons that we surveyed is not a big survey. So it's 1,000, close to 1,200 interviews, but 100% were secondary movement. This is one of the first elements I would like to fix in our discussion, is that we are talking about Haitian national who left Haiti many years back. The vast majority, and in this case 100%, but with some exception, this does reflect the overall situation. The vast majority are persons that lived for a relatively long time, being from several years to 1 or 2 years in other countries in the region. So this, we call it a secondary movement. It's not a movement. So when sometimes you hear people say, oh yes, of course, the assassination of the president, the earthquake recently, this prompted an outflow of Haitian from Haiti. That is not the case. That has not been the case. There are persons that left recently, but the vast majority of this group we are talking about is secondary movement and stayed for quite a long time. Now, the other element that I wanted to mention, and this, of course, is something that when you interview, you can never have the certainty of the response. But the vast majority of the persons we interviewed did not state that their objective was to reach the United States. And I think this is the second point I would like to share and to put on the table. The first one, as I said, secondary movement, and the second one, that a bit this idea, oh, everybody moves north to reach the United States. I think it really needs to be nuanced, and maybe we can talk about it more later. So the majority did mention that they wanted to move from Tapachula, of course, but to move into other regions or other states within the country. Some of them, yes, did express the will to move north. And maybe another point which is important is that almost 50% of the population surveyed did speak Spanish. And this is Spanish quite well. So we already have one of the big barriers, which is the language barrier, which at least for 50% of the population might not have been really problematic in this sense. We can pass to the next one. A few more elements just to give some of the figures that might help the discussion. But one is that, and that's why we are talking about this important number of Asians, that around 133,000 who crossed the border, the Darien gap between in 2021. Of course, those figures cannot be considered as 100% precise, but to give an idea of the magnitude, approximately 90,000 were Haitian nationals. Just to give an idea that already in January, the figures we receive from our colleagues in the region tells us that is not the case any longer. And now, for example, now the main nationality of crossing the Darien Gap is Venezuelan national. There is a change there. So one also the question is, what is happening and what will happen, and of course that is difficult to say, to the many thousands or tens of thousands that did not move. And particularly now I'm referring to Brazil and Chile, since are the two main countries where Haitian arrived first. There is still a very important population of Asian nationals, which is still in those countries. What will happen next? Will also, a moment or another, take the route north, or it's a phenomenon that has been prompted by several variables in 2021, but it's over. But we are talking about maybe close to 300,000 or 250,000 still in those countries who arrived after 2010. So I think it's something that we need to keep in mind. And then I already mentioned it. Major pressure on the south of Mexico with less resources. And I think what is very important to highlight here, and is one of the, I think, of the key topics of this discussion, is that at the moment of this big arrival and numbers arriving, the only alternative to regularize in Mexico, differently to what happened, for example, in Brazil after 2010 and 2011, was through an asylum application. So this put it, let's say that risks to have two negative effects. One negative, or maybe three negative effects. One negative effect is to create long queues at the Commission of Refugee Office, the COMAR office, with a lot of frustration and not the possibility to respond to those huge surge of numbers. The frustration and the decisions of move irregularly because of the long waits and the situation which could become unmanageable. And the other one is that the fact that maybe the possibility of having an alternative regulation, which could have been done through a humanitarian visa or a working visa, to match with a very important gap that Mexico has today. Mexico today has much more vacancies than people that can take those vacancies. So there is a demand. There is a demand for labor force, for workforce in Mexico. But I just put it. I just table it as a topic. And then I will go quick to the conclusion. To the conclusion of this brief presentation. So, as I said, despite the boost on COMAR and the strengthening the capacity of COMAR, which is also has increased a lot the decision capacity, it was not enough to respond to such a big increase, and also considering that many of the person applying for asylum maybe at the end would have their claims rejected. And a bit the point is that we are talking about, and this is why it's very important, the relationship we have with our colleagues from IOM, and I think some colleagues might be attending also this seminar, this encounter, because we are facing a situation in which, in some cases, we are not necessarily confronted with persons that will qualify as refugees under the 51 Convention or even under Cartagena maybe, but they're not a migrant itself in terms of a free decision to move from one country to another for a better life, but as they're facing a lot of constraints, and one of those not having the possibility to return to their home country due to the situation that Haiti is experiencing recently. And when I say this, I mean, COMAR has a recognition rate of 35%. What does it mean? It is that 35 out of 100 Haitian applying for asylum will be recognized as having a substantiated claim for refugee status or complementary protection, which is not, I mean, it's a reasonable number, but what happened with the rest, and what is the option, and what is the possibility, and there where I think that Mexico is already playing a role and could play even a bigger role. Next, and I will not enter into details of what we have done to stabilize the population, because I think it's not really the topic of this discussion. But we can quickly scroll through the next one. Let's leave the yes. I think this one is only this one is important because it gives a bit of a response to the question of what could be done. So we have in Mexico a fairly successful program, which is basically a person applying for asylum in southern Mexico. Once they are recognized as refugees, we accompany them to transfer them to part of the country where housing, employment, education are more accessible, and there are more options for stabilization. This program has created a network of more than 260 companies, including some major international companies, many Mexican companies, which are basically receiving refugees in the workforce. And this is contributing to the stabilization of this population. So the question is, or one of the point is, why not expanding this program also to persons that wants to stay in Mexico, but as I said before, they would not necessarily quite qualify as refugees. And so we have launched together with IOM a pilot project. We basically are in agreement with the Mexican government and say, okay, let's take some profiles that have a sufficient element to think that they're going to stay in Mexico, that maybe they speak Spanish, they want to stabilize in Mexico, and offer them the opportunity to do so through this program, which was originally designed for refugees, but could be expanded to other profiles. And this we have just started recently. And if you think, and this is a bit what we call it a win-win also, is that those jobs are all formal, in the formal economy, meaning that the person that are employed, they become taxpayers, and more or less they are contributing, if we take the 16,000 individuals that we have integrated, they're contributing with $5 million a year in terms of taxes to their community. So there is, there is an interesting point on how this could be seen also as not a charity and not only out of generosity, but also have an economic impact, which could be considered as positive. And I think we can quickly go to the conclusion. This is only to say that we have already more than 400 Haitians that are already included into the program, and we are monitoring very closely if they stay, what is the retention rate, and for the moment it's quite positive. And through the program that we started with IOM, we have already one family, because it just started at the end of January, who moved from Tapachula to San Luis de Potosí, and in 5 days they found housing and they were already gainfully employed. So maybe we just got to the particularly successful case, but it's a good indication that at least we can venture down this alley. And those persons, they do receive a visa, which is a humanitarian visa. So it consider that it's awarded under a protection consideration. So it is not a working visa as such, but it has this component of protection consideration. And just to conclude, and maybe to open up for the exchange and the discussion, the next one and last is this is a bit the points I would like to make. First of all, Haitian migration or Haitian refugees or Haitian in need of protections that move in the continent, they cannot see, in my opinion, as a country-specific issue, and it becomes basically the spotlight depending on where the population is. This is not an approach that really can be really constructed, but it's more a regional approach in which roles and responsibilities and responses can be tailored a bit on the fair share of what are the capacity of the different countries, but also a number of other elements that should be taken into consideration. So I think really it's important to stress the regional dimension. From Chile to the US, this is a big region, and as Piotr, you well said at the beginning, people are not just flying and appearing one day to another. This is a long walk through the continent. And so what is the regional setup, or should be the regional setup, to maybe try to respond in a better way? I already mentioned we have almost 400 persons that are gainfully employed. This could be expanded. And we have some of the companies, or Samsung, for example, which is important, a very well-known company, which has just decided to join in and take part of the specifically of the Asian population. I think it's important, and this is that Mexico has been relatively open and welcoming. Let's put it this way. With all the caveat that we can put to this comment, that we can discuss it, but it's relatively, and as compared to other dimensions. And then I mentioned already the pilot project, which could be explored further. And I thank to my colleagues from IOM also to be attending if they are in the audience, and maybe they want to comment. And then so beyond the questions of how could Mexico contribute to manage the Haiti migration, I think that with the response, how can an hemispheric approach be drafted, a regional, and there are a lot of discussion now about the regional compact, in which one based on responsibility sharing, international and regional cooperation, and not a burden shifting. Let's be a bit provocative in this. And I want just to conclude with one comment. I was in Greece before coming to Mexico. And I was there during the so-called, I think wrongly, so-called Europe crisis, because let me say that 1 million of refugees in a space of 500 million, it's hardly can be seen as really as a crisis. I think it was a situation that needed to be dealt with and very seriously, but maybe not a crisis. But I was confronted every day with Syrian, with Afghans, with Iraqi nationals, none of them speaking Greek. Most of them didn't speak English, arriving from a completely different culture, completely different religion background, completely different environment, and attempting an integration process in a country of 10 million people with 40% unemployment, coming out of a dramatic financial crisis, and it was hard. Now, I'm not saying that in Mexico there are no constraints, but it's a 130 million almost population, a country of 130 million, one of the 15 main economies in the world, with the important labor market very active, and most of the population we're talking about, either they can speak the language or they can learn the language relatively quickly, are in working age. So I think that there are opportunities there. There are a lot of challenges, but there are also a number of opportunities. And I'm sorry I'm being a bit extended. I'm the typical Italian, which say I will be brief and then speaks for half an hour. So I'm very sorry if I took more than the time we had agreed. Piotr, back to you.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much. It really gives us a very beautiful overall painting of the situation. And one of the questions here was about since we have a mixed audience, perhaps it would be good just to explain a little bit more about their previous country of origin. It's 100% secondary flow. Why are they in South America? Why are they leaving South America? What type of status did they have in South America? And how will this status affect their ability to seek asylum in Mexico? Whether it was irregular status, and if it was irregular, is it because they never had regular, or is it because it expired? Was it tied to their employment permits, and they lost employment with the crisis? What was the situation back there in the countries where they come from?
Yeah, Joe, thank you very much. So this is a complex question, and would require quite a complex answer in the sense that we cannot have a one-size-fits-all answer. But I can give some elements. And the first element is that I would say that most did have a regular status, but not necessarily neither a permanent residency or a refugee status. So the number of, for example, let me use the case of Brazil, and then I will talk about quickly about Chile. But let me take the case of Brazil. Some elements we do know that are relevant. First is that Brazil had a very important, similar to what is happening in Mexico now for very different reasons in terms of a shortage of workforce. And this was very much linked to the construction and all the economic growth that was linked to both the Rio Olympics and the World Cup did create an environment. And it was an economy that around the time and briefly after the earthquake in Haiti, which definitely has been one of the element prompting an important exit, although Haitians have been traveling out abroad for quite a long time before, but definitely 2010 it is one of the moment that prompted important movement. So there was an opening, and Brazil also quite pragmatically, I have to say, decided to apply and to give temporary visas which are not linked to an asylum process. It's something that we are considering now as an option here in Mexico, although I think it's better to stick to the humanitarian visa because of the protection consideration they have. So most of the population did arrive with an official and was given an official stay permit, which was linked to also a situation in which the economy was growing and there were opportunities, and also I think that is known that the Haitian nationals are in general hardworking and very much into construction, into this kind of opportunity. One thing that then happened is that many factors. One, COVID that has impacted all the countries, didn't spare the impact in Brazil and in Chile and other countries. The real got a very strong devaluation, and one of the things that for Asian was very important for many of migrant and refugees, but for Asian it was the possibility to send remittances, which lost completely. They all of a sudden lost their value, and more. And this was more for Chile than Brazil. Change in the government and more strict regulation in terms of renewal of stay permits, renewal of residence permit, and several cases in which one component of the family could regularize or had regularized previously its stay, and another member of the family could not do so. So within the same households there were different status. So I think that there's been, in that sense, we had a variety of status. Not to say refugee protection has not been and was not the main. Actually, the numbers of both asylum claims and refugee recognized is extremely small in those countries. Now, for the ones that had children born into those in those countries. Of course, children, as I said, got nationalities, and parents could acquire a permanent residence through those linkages. So I would say, to give a quick answer to a complex and long question, generally regular status, but not through necessary neither a permanent residencies or a refugee status with possibility of nationalization through this process. In terms of the second part of the question was what is the responsibility, if I understand correctly, or what is the role of those countries where Haitian lived for many years? There, I think it's a question of bilateral discussion and negotiations on the eventual readmission agreements, and possibility of voluntary return to their countries, and possibility of discussing some of the, as I say, the readmission agreement, which is a bilateral discussion between states. The question I think is very valid is the fact that they have lived in those countries and for many years. Is this an impediment to their asylum claims? And it's not an impediment such. It might, during the individual analysis and the individual evaluation, depending on which type of status they have. So, for example, if they did receive a refugee status, which is a very, very limited cases in one of those countries, then could become eventually an impediment as a question of further resettlement and the possibility of having actually enjoyed protection in another country. But since this is not the case, and many cases where permits that were not renewed or were not extended or temporary residency, it doesn't become necessary as such as an impediment. At least this is for the Mexican Commission for Refugees processing of individual evaluation. So it is not per se an impediment, but it can, of course, be one of the reasons for that end up making a negative evaluation. but mostly would be what are the conditions in which these persons were living, and if there are or not issues linked to potential persecutions or risk or in terms of the well-being, or all the different considerations to award a refugee status or complementary protection.
You pointed to a number of interesting facts, and especially with the children born and their parents' possibility to obtain permanent residence in South America. This is another interesting venue to study. Maybe just one more follow-up question. So we talked about the possible impediment or lack of such impediment in Mexico. Now, if they were granted refugee or complementary protection in Mexico, would you know? I know you are working in Mexico, not in the United States, but would this possibly be impediment if they were to, after receiving protected status in Mexico, to receive one in the United States?
As you said, we are looking at Mexico, and I will focus on the Mexican situation. I would say similar, the same. Those are our consideration that during an asylum process, I think the overarching consideration is to identify if the person did find protection in another country and was enjoying protection in another country, and the reason of a further movement is not prompted to the lack of the possibility of enjoying such protection in the country. Those indeed are consideration that each of the asylum courts and asylum institution are taking into consideration during the asylum process, which, I repeat what I said before, still should be an individual assessment through individual. We call it fair and fast processing. I mean, but fair should always be the first element. Now, if you ask, you didn't ask, but if you would ask me, do you think that protection and stabilization in Mexico it is a possibility? I would say not for everybody and not everywhere, because also it's a very diverse country. But the indication we have through the work we've done with refugees is that Mexico can be also a country of destination. And I think we shouldn't be too ambitious and say it's not a country of transit or it's not a country of expulsion. We know that how many Mexicans are seeking protection outside of their communities. But I'm quite convinced that I can say fairly with fair security that Mexico, under certain circumstances, can be a country of asylum for other nationalities, and why not a country of stabilization also for Haitian nationals. And we have a case of more than 3,000, I think now less 3,500 Haitian nationals, which arrived much before than this last flow. We're talking about 2016, and which actually, and interestingly enough, it is this community, fairly big community, is exactly at the border between Mexico and the US in Tijuana, and it's called even some call it Little Haiti or in Tijuana, and have found a certain level of stabilities and possibility of staying in Mexico, even being so close to the border. And maybe, Piotr, one element, and because I don't want to, I want to be fair to the variables, and I think I cannot skip one. Of course, there have been changes last year in the region. Important changes, not only important changes in terms of COVID, in terms of declining of economic data and indicators and all what we saw, but there has also been an important change in the U.S. administration and a declared openness or rethinking about managing asylum, and also the temporary protection status was declared, which was basically a way for the U.S. administration to regularize Haitian nationals that were already in the U.S. at the moment of the declaration of the temporary, as it is always. This might have been one of the variables that also, for some, gave the idea maybe this is the right moment to go north, because we might have a chance to be, I don't think it's really to be under the TPS, because I think people do know that it was, but it's, if there is an opening towards my cousin, my friends, maybe there is this opening also for you. But, and this is a completely personal analysis, I don't think it's the main variable. I think it's a variable, but I don't think it's the main variable. And I think when we take all of them together, we have to balance them out. So for me, it's very important, and this, I fight always a lot about this, trying to identify if the push factors are stronger than the pull factor, or the pull factor are stronger than the push factor. I think we lose a bit of time into that analysis. And I think it's a combination. I think it's a combination, and it's a combination of, unfortunately, also a scenario in which instability seems to be increasing instead of decreasing in many of the countries in the region. And this might actually prompt us again to this need to this hemispherical regional approach in which each country takes its fair share of migration management, refugee protection, in a way that this can be managed, because it cannot be avoided. It cannot be avoided, and it won't be avoided. And I think also that in that sense, Mexico also, let's recognize Mexico did never close its border, even with COVID, never used COVID to close its border to asylum seekers. And this, I think, we have to consider. It did other things, and we saw many other things, but in terms of the possibility of somebody to ask for asylum in Mexico, it was not closed. So I mixed a bit several questions and several answers.
That's fine. It's actually someone asked about the hemispheric approach, thinking pragmatically, what could be the first building blocks of such a hemispheric approach? What's the most viable and likely?
I think this is really one of the regions where the two global compacts, the global compacts on refugees and the global compacts on migrants, really could be put side by side to work together in looking. And I think that I want to use something that I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation. I think that to complex and diverse reasons to move, you have to find also complex and diverse responses. So I think that the point here is that, for example, alternative legal pathway to move from one to another is one element of this. Of this, looking at labor mobility, where there is short, and it's not only Mexico. This is a regional issue where the demand in terms of labor, in terms of workforce, it's higher than the offer in the country, and there could be the use of a regular transfer and migration pathway. Canada is one of the countries, the US, Mexico, and other. This is one side. Reinforcing asylum capacity. Maybe, I think we have to be fair. A country like Guatemala will not have the same capacity in terms of asylum than a country like Mexico, but it has its own capacity. And we see Guatemala, the number of asylum seekers increased. But why it increased? Because the capacity of the response of the government also increased. So I think that is another, it's another point. If you want to go beyond those elements, we can look at all the discussion on root causes, stabilization, good governance, and really an effort in terms of seeing how this, but this is more a multi-generational, I think multi-generational commitment. We have a platform. We as UNHCR, we prompted a platform which is a regional, it's a 7 countries platform, which is called the MIRPS, which is the Marco Integral para Soluciones y Protección. But basically, it's 7 countries sitting together and looking how their asylum system could be enhanced. And of course, Belize or Costa Rica or Mexico or Salvador, Guatemala, they have completely or Honduras, completely different situation and completely different context. But each one could probably do more in terms of refugee protection, in terms of stabilization, and at the same time looking at the alternative. So I'm not saying at all, and please don't. I really hope I didn't sound like very simplistic and saying this can be fixed. I want to put it in another way. I think we're living a fact. People are on the move. And many of those people on the move, they do it out of constraint and out of impossibility to make another choice. and not only because they are refugees and because they are pushed out of their houses by criminal gangs, and so they have no other. No, there are others that have other situations. Let's see what happened with the hurricanes in Honduras, and coupled with COVID, coupled with the economic constraint. So the fact that this region see an increased population movement. I don't want to enter into this topic now, but we have Venezuelan is another big population in the move. Traditionally more in the southern corner, in Colombia, but we might see, and we actually are seeing some indication of movement. So I think that the question is not and should not be how there are attempts to try to stop the movement, or how there are attempts for each country to actually pass the responsibility to the next one, but how this can be more worked out together in a regional approach. And with all the difficulty it has, I think there are also signs that this is the direction in which we should go. Now, what can UNHCR do? We can contribute, but we are a small player in the big picture, and we are a refugee agency. We work with refugees, we work with internally displaced, but this is a much bigger topic.
Yeah, absolutely. There are some questions about the integration. What helped employers get interested in giving Haitians employment in Mexico? Were there any U.S. companies that contributed? Are there any opportunities in rural Mexico, where there is probably a strong labor demand?
So the main factor at the moment that helps to create an environment which is conducive to this matching between the companies and the people on the move. Let me put them this way, to be a bit broader than refugees or only one nationality, is the fact that there is a dire need of workforce. And this is not only in the industry, it's services, it's industry, it's US companies, Canadian companies, German companies, French companies, Mexican companies. So it is a matter of fact. I have asked now to actually conduct a technical studies to say how many vacancies per sector, and what are the wages, and what are Mexican wages are not very high, actually are relatively low. So there is a point there. Cost of living is also lower than in other countries. But the first point I would say, there is a need. The economy needs workforce. Now the other point is that what the company needs is regular workforce. So there is one of the key elements is how to ensure that people can have a regular document, and a regular document that allows them to work, which the humanitarian visa does allow people to work, up to recently was basically only given through a refugee status process, which was limiting and creating a lot of pressure and creating a lot of delays, and this now seems to start easing up, and it's part of what we are really pushing. Generally, companies tell us that foreigners have the tendency to rotate less and to move less from one company to another. And this is considered to be an added value for the companies, because one of the big problems is a very high turnover. They train, they give capacity to people, and then after a week or months, they move. In general, what we see, the statistic that they give us, that refugees, and now this new component of mixed status, tend to stay longer, maybe because they don't have such a strong community around, that they are now move here, move there, or they're more attracted by the idea of having a certain level of stability as compared to have maybe a little bit of additional gain. So I think that those are the two main elements. There is a need. There is a possibility to do it regularly, and a prospect of some level of stability. It's a bit early to say particularly on the Haitians that we have the 400, and it's a bit more now, that we have already matched with job opportunities. It's a bit early to say how stable this will be on the long term, because we don't have the long term yet, but we are monitoring it closely. So in this sense, I think that we are in a situation which will probably continue. The rural area, yes, there are opportunities as well. We have not explored them yet as much as the urban, more industrial or services sectors. But is one of the areas we want to look more closely. But we do know that also in those sectors, and in some cases in southern Mexico, there are opportunities. So up to now, the main efforts was to move from south to north and to much more in urban areas, in medium and big cities, more in industry and services. But it can evolve. And one of the other important thing to mention is that there is no concept of, but the foreigners are stealing the work to the Mexicans, because of the shortage of workforce and the impossibility to match with sufficiently. Of course, there are many Mexican nationals that are employed, but it doesn't match. The offer and demand doesn't match. So there is a gap, and that gap is the gap that is being initially filled, but still we could. So just to give you an idea, Piotr, when we do our job fairs in, let me say, Monterrey, just to give one, at the end of the induction process for the refugees, companies come and make their job fair. And we calculated that the average is 3 to 4 offers per person. So each refugee received between 3 and 4 job offers, which in a very easy way we could multiply it by 4, the program, and still by 3, and still there will be space. So in that sense, we think that there is an opportunity. Not everybody will stay. Not the matching will function as for everybody, but it is a potential that can be further explored. When I talk to companies, I do go myself around the country and talk to the companies, and I always ask them the same question. To each one of them, either the HR manager or the CEOs, I ask them the same question. I say, how many refugees could you take? And systematically, the answer is, how many can you bring? And it's almost always the same answer. So the question is, why not trying to make the best out of this juncture, which seems to be at the moment? Let's cross finger. I mean, say Brazil 10 years ago maybe had a similar or somehow an economy which was growing, the big constructions, and then the situation changed. So we cannot know what might happen in the future. But at the moment, definitely we think that there is a positive juncture in this sense.
And legally, Mexican migration system, as I understand it, is set up in a way that while you apply for asylum, you can obtain a work permit. Then when you have a recognized status, you access permanent residence, and this paves your way towards citizenship. Eventually, someone wants to stay in Mexico and adjust status to citizenship.
That's correct. That's correct. In fact, Mexico has a naturalization legislation which is fairly advanced, and a person that is a recognized refugee after 2 years can apply for citizenship. And now we have a queue of 500 cases that we are processing with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of persons that soon will not be refugees but will be Mexicans, because they will receive their if they are successful. But in general, there is a process, but it's successful. So yes, in that sense, and as you said, with a visa that you get as an asylum seeker, but also for other humanitarian reasons, which is what we are pushing now together with IOM, you can work and you can receive your tax number and you can work and company. We have some, just to say, I mean, the world is not everything so easy, but one of the constraints is several banks and financial institutions still have difficulties in recognizing that document as a document that it's enough to open a bank account. And since now the vast majority of the companies, they don't pay you cash or through a check, they pay through bank transfer. This has been one of the Australian, we're working with the big banks to overcome these difficulties. There are some delays in the issuing of the migratory documentation. So there are constraints. I'm not saying that everything is functioning, and the delays in recognition of refugee status also implies that people have to stay longer into the south, and where job opportunities and the labor market and the formal labor market is much less favorable than in other parts of the country. So Mexico is experiencing a number of difficulties and constraints, but there is this balance between constraint and opportunities, which make it quite attractive to venture and to work more into this direction. And there are 32 entities in the federal state of Mexico, and most of them do have a situation in which the integration of smaller or bigger number of foreigners could be considered, but not necessarily in the south. I think that we can look more north, and then, as you said, rural areas, opportunities also, because not everybody wants to work in a factory or working in a service sector. But so that I think is one of the things we need to continue to look at.
Wonderful. It is my duty to end on time. So even though we have more questions, I probably should wrap up, unless you want to add something else to it. Otherwise, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for decomplexifying it a little bit for us. I know that it's a very complex task on everyone in Comar who works on every individual case, because they have to look into individual cases. And so that's a lot of work in front of everyone who is in charge, and that's perhaps it for now. We will make this presentation publicly available. Thank you very much for all for attending, and thank you to you, Giovanni.
And thank you, and Duke University, and all the audience, and really I hope that, and I will think that this chat has been useful if I could give some element to untangle this big complex situation, and not added maybe confusion to already a big difficult topic. So thank you very much for your initiative to invite me, Giovanni. Thank you very much to you as well, and yeah, who knows, maybe we'll have other chances to touch upon other topics.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much, Giovanni.